My name is Daniel Hayes, and 6 years ago, my older brother stood at his wedding reception, clinked his champagne glass until the room went silent, and announced to 300 guests that I'd just filed for bankruptcy. He smiled while he said it. The kind of smile that cuts deeper than any knife. Everyone turned to look at me, their faces a mix of pity and judgment, and in that moment, I wanted the marble floor to swallow me whole. But instead, I stood up, straightened my borrowed suit jacket, and said 5 words that changed everything. Actually, I just bought this venue. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The room erupted. My brother's face drained of color. His new wife gasped. And me, I finally breathed for the first time in 3 years. But to understand how I got there, how I went from the family failure to the man who owned the most expensive wedding venue in the city, you need to know where it all started. You need to know about the version of me who believed family meant something more than competition. It was a humid Saturday in June when everything fell apart the first time. Not the wedding, that came later. This was 3 years before, when I still thought I could count on the people who shared my last name. I was 31 years old, standing in the kitchen of the small house I'd bought 2 years prior, the first major purchase I'd ever made. I remember the exact moment because I was holding a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Brother," a gag gift from my younger sister Emma during the previous Christmas. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift at the automotive shop where I worked as a mechanic, and my hands still smelled like motor oil and brake fluid no matter how many times I'd scrubbed them. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn 3 doors down. I loved that quiet. It meant the day was mine, that I'd earned this moment of peace. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my brother Marcus. "Can you come by the house tomorrow morning? Need to talk about something important. Family stuff." I stared at those 2 words. Family stuff. In my experience, that phrase never meant anything good. It meant someone needed money, or someone was sick, or someone had made a decision that was going to affect everyone else without asking first. But Marcus was my older brother, the one who'd taught me how to throw a football, who'd let me tag along to parties when I was too young to be there, who'd helped me move into my first apartment. So I texted back. "Sure. What time? 9 work for you?" He replied immediately. "Perfect. Thanks, little bro." I should have known then. Should have felt the shift in the air, the way you can sometimes sense a storm coming before the sky even darkens. But I didn't. I just finished my coffee, took a shower that ran lukewarm because the water heater was acting up again, and fell asleep on the couch with the television playing some rerun of a cop show I'd seen a dozen times. The next morning, I drove across town to the house where Marcus lived with his girlfriend, a woman named Simone who worked in pharmaceutical sales and always looked like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. Their place was in one of those new developments where every house looked almost identical, with perfect lawns and 2-car garages and mailboxes that matched. My truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 with a dent in the passenger door and a crack across the windshield, looked out of place parked in their driveway. I could see the curtain move in the front window as I walked up the path, and by the time I reached the door, Marcus had already opened it. He looked good. He always looked good. Clean-shaven, hair styled just right, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Come on in, man. Thanks for coming." I stepped inside. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something baking, maybe muffins or bread. Simone was in the kitchen, her back to us, arranging flowers in a vase on the island. She glanced over her shoulder and gave me a quick wave. "Hey Daniel." "Morning," I said, suddenly aware of how worn my jeans were, how my sneakers squeaked slightly on their polished hardwood floors. Marcus led me to the living room, where our parents were already sitting. Mom on the cream-colored sofa, Dad in the armchair by the window. That's when I knew this wasn't just a casual conversation. This was an ambush. I felt my stomach tighten, that old familiar feeling of being the kid called into the principal's office, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Mom smiled at me, the kind of smile that's meant to be reassuring but somehow makes everything worse. She was wearing her church clothes, which meant she'd come straight from the early service. Dad just nodded, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, son," Dad said, gesturing to the love seat across from them. Marcus sat next to me, and Simone appeared with a tray of coffee mugs, setting them on the table before disappearing back into the kitchen. I didn't reach for the coffee. I just waited, hands clasped between my knees, feeling like I was about to be told someone had died. Marcus cleared his throat. "So, I'm sure you're wondering why we called this little meeting." I didn't say anything. Just looked at him, then at Mom, then at Dad. The silence stretched out like taffy. "Your brother has some exciting news," Mom said, her voice bright and brittle. "He and Simone are getting married." I blinked. That was it. That's what this was about. "Congratulations," I said, looking at Marcus. "That's great, man." "Really?" He nodded, but his expression didn't change. "Thanks. We're planning the wedding for next spring. Going to do it at the Grandview estate. You know that place up on the hill overlooking the river?" I knew it. Everyone knew it. The Grandview estate was the most exclusive venue in the city, the kind of place where politicians and business executives held their events. It cost more to rent for a weekend than most people made in 6 months. "That's incredible," I said, meaning it. I was happy for him. I really was. Even if a small part of me wondered how he could afford it, how anyone could afford something like that. But before I could say anything else, Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Here's the thing, Daniel. We wanted to talk to you because we need your help." And there it was. The real reason for the meeting. I should have seen it coming. Should have known that any time my family gathered like this, it wasn't just to share good news. It was to ask for something. "What kind of help?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Marcus exchanged a look with Dad, then turned back to me. "The wedding is going to be expensive. I mean, really expensive. We're talking about 200 guests, full catering, live band, the whole thing. And Simone's family is already contributing a lot, but we're still short." I waited. He took a breath. "We were hoping you could help us out. Chip in maybe 15 or 20,000. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know how else to react. $15,000 or $20,000? I repeated slowly. Marcus nodded. "I know it's a lot, but you've got that house now, right? You could take out a home equity loan or something. Use the value you've built up." I stared at him. My house, the one I'd saved for years to buy, the one I'd put every spare dollar into, the place that represented the first real stability I'd ever had, he wanted me to leverage that for his wedding. For one day. One party. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said carefully. "I'm still paying off the mortgage. And work's been slow lately. The shop's been cutting hours. That's the thing about being a mechanic. When the economy dips, people stop getting their cars fixed. They drive on bald tires and ignore the check engine light because they can't afford the repair bill. And when people aren't getting their cars fixed, I'm not getting paid." Marcus's expression shifted, just slightly, from hopeful to something harder. "Come on, Daniel. This is my wedding. This is important." "I'm not saying it's not important," I said. "I'm just saying I can't afford to give you that kind of money right now. Or anytime soon." Mom spoke up then, her voice gentle but insistent. "Family helps family, sweetheart. We all need to make sacrifices sometimes." A sacrifice would be working extra shifts, I thought. A sacrifice would be skipping a vacation or eating ramen for a month. This wasn't a sacrifice. This was financial suicide. Dad cleared his throat. "Your brother has always been there for you. Remember when you needed that loan for community college? Who co-signed for you? I remembered. Marcus had co-signed for my student loan when I was 19, desperate to get some kind of degree that might help me earn more than minimum wage. I'd paid that loan back in full, every single payment on time, sometimes going without things I needed to make sure the money was there. But I guess that didn't matter. That was supposed to be held over my head forever. I appreciate everything Marcus has done for me, I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. But I can't take on that kind of debt for a wedding. There are other ways to cut costs. You don't need the most expensive venue in the city. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus's jaw tightened. Simone's been dreaming about getting married at the Grandview since she was a little girl. I'm not going to disappoint her. Then maybe Simone's family can contribute more, I suggested. Or maybe you can wait another year and save up. The room went cold. I could feel it, that shift in the air, the way everything just froze. Marcus stood up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You know what, Daniel? I should have known better than to ask you for anything. You've always been selfish. Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I've been selfish. I stood up too, my own anger rising now. I've been working 60-hour weeks trying to keep my head above water. I've been there for every family dinner, every birthday, every time someone needed help moving or fixing something or just someone to talk to. And now, because I can't hand over $20,000 I don't have, I'm selfish. You've always had an excuse, Marcus shot back. Always playing the victim. Poor Daniel, life's so hard, no one understands. Meanwhile, the rest of us are out here actually building something. Building something. I wanted to laugh again, but this time it would have come out bitter. Marcus worked in finance, made 6 figures a year, drove a car that cost more than I'd earn in 3 years. And he was lecturing me about building something. Boys, Mom said, standing up and putting herself between us. This isn't helping. We're family. We need to find a way to work this out. There's nothing to work out, I said, my voice flat. I can't give you the money. That's the end of it. Marcus shook his head, his expression somewhere between disgust and disappointment. Fine. But don't expect me to forget this. When you need something, when you come crawling back asking for help, remember this moment. I won't, I said quietly. Because I won't be asking. I left without saying goodbye to Simone, without finishing the conversation, without waiting for anyone to try to stop me. I just walked out the front door, got in my truck, and drove away. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, my chest tight with the anger and hurt I didn't know how to process. I'd spent my whole life trying to be a good brother, a good son. I'd shown up. I'd helped when I could. I'd never asked for much in return. And now, because I couldn't bankrupt myself for a wedding, I was the villain. The next few weeks were tense. I didn't hear from Marcus at all, which wasn't surprising. What did surprise me was how the rest of the family started treating me. Emma called me once, her voice careful, asking if I was okay. She'd heard about the fight, heard that I'd refused to help with the wedding. I could hear the judgment in her voice, even though she tried to hide it. Mom sent me a few text messages, Bible verses about generosity and sacrifice. Dad didn't reach out at all. It was like I'd committed some unforgivable sin, and now I was being slowly excommunicated. Work got worse. The shop owner, a gruff man named Pete who'd been in the business for 40 years, called me into his office one afternoon. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. I'm sorry, Daniel, he said, not meeting my eyes. I've got to cut your hours down to part-time. Maybe 3 days a week. I just don't have enough work coming in. I nodded, feeling my stomach drop. I'd been expecting it, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. I understand. Thanks for keeping me on it all. Pete sighed. You're a good worker. If things pick up, you'll be the first one I call back full-time. But we both knew that might not happen. Might never happen. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to figure out how I was going to make ends meet on half my income. The mortgage alone was going to wipe out most of what I'd be earning. Then there was the car payment, insurance, utilities, food. I ran the numbers 3 different ways, trying to find some combination that worked, some way to stretch every dollar far enough. It didn't work. No matter how I calculated it, I was going to come up short. Way short. I thought about getting a second job, but who would hire someone who could only work evenings and weekends when most places needed full-time employees? I thought about selling the house, but the market was terrible, and I'd barely built up any equity. I'd end up owing more than it was worth. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly trapped. Like I was standing at the edge of a cliff with no way forward and no way back. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak around me, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I was going to have to file for bankruptcy. The thought made me sick. Bankruptcy was for people who'd made bad choices, who'd been irresponsible, who'd lived beyond their means. At least, that's what I'd always believed. But here I was, someone who'd worked hard and tried to do everything right, and it still wasn't enough. I spent the next 2 months trying to avoid it. I picked up odd jobs wherever I could find them. I fixed my neighbor's lawnmower for $40. I helped a friend of a friend move and got paid under the table. I sold my television, my gaming console, anything I didn't absolutely need. But it was like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. Every week I fell further behind. The mortgage company started calling. Then the credit card companies. Then the collections agencies. Their voices were always the same, detached and vaguely threatening, asking when I planned to make a payment, reminding me of the consequences of default. I stopped answering my phone unless I recognized the number. Stopped checking my mail because I couldn't stand seeing another past due notice. I was drowning, and no one seemed to notice or care. Finally, in late October, I made an appointment with a bankruptcy attorney. Her name was Rachel Kim, and her office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The waiting room smelled like coffee and had outdated magazines scattered across a small table. I sat there for 20 minutes, my leg bouncing with nervous energy, before she called me back. Rachel was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with short black hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. She listened while I explained my situation, taking notes on a legal pad and occasionally asking questions. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression that was somehow both sympathetic and matter-of-fact. "You're a textbook case for Chapter 7 bankruptcy," she said. "It's going to wipe out most of your unsecured debt, give you a fresh start." "What about my house?" I asked. "Will I lose it?" She shook her head. "Texas has pretty generous homestead exemptions. As long as you can keep making the mortgage payments going forward, you should be able to keep the house." "The problem is, I can't make the payments," I admitted. "Not on part-time hours." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "That complicates things. You might want to consider surrendering the house as part of the bankruptcy. Walk away, let the bank take it, and start over without that debt hanging over you." The thought of losing my house, the only thing I'd ever really owned, the place that was supposed to be my foundation, felt like having my heart ripped out. But what choice did I have? I could keep fighting, keep drowning, and lose it anyway. Or I could let go now and at least have a chance to rebuild. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's do it." Rachel walked me through the paperwork, explained the process, told me what to expect. It would take a few months for everything to go through. In the meantime, I should stop making payments on anything I was planning to discharge. Save that money for moving expenses, for security deposits on a new apartment, for starting over. I left her office feeling numb. Not relieved, not hopeful, just empty. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time, watching people come and go from the nail salon, living their normal lives, unaware that mine was falling apart. That evening, I got a text from Emma. "Hey, are you coming to Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's?" I stared at the message. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. The idea of sitting around a table with my family, pretending everything was fine, pretending I wasn't in the middle of losing everything, felt impossible. "I don't think so," I texted back. "Things are pretty tight right now." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Marcus is going to be there. He and Simone are announcing the wedding date." Of course they were. Of course I was supposed to sit there and smile and congratulate them while my entire life crumbled. I didn't respond. Just set my phone down and drove home. The bankruptcy filing went through in early December. I got the official notice in the mail, a thick envelope full of legal documents that basically said I was broken and starting over from less than zero. I didn't tell anyone. Not my family, not my friends, nobody. I just packed up my house in silence, boxing up the life I'd tried to build, and moved into a studio apartment on the south side of town. The apartment was small, barely 400 square feet, with thin walls and a window that looked out onto a dumpster. But it was cheap, and it was mine, and it was all I could afford. I slept on an air mattress for the first month because I'd sold my bed frame to make rent. Ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches and instant ramen. Took the bus because I'd surrendered my truck as part of the bankruptcy. Christmas came and went. I didn't go to any family gatherings, didn't exchange gifts, didn't call. I just worked my part-time hours at the shop and spent the rest of my time in that tiny apartment, trying to figure out what came next. It was the loneliest winter of my life. But it was also the winter I started to change. Not in some dramatic, overnight way. It was slower than that, quieter. I started reading books about business and finance, checking them out from the library because I couldn't afford to buy them. I started learning about investing, about building wealth, about the difference between working for money and making money work for you. One night, I came across a book about real estate investing. It talked about how property could generate passive income, how you could build wealth even without a lot of capital if you were smart and willing to work hard. I read that book 3 times, cover to cover, taking notes in the margins, highlighting passages that felt important. And slowly, an idea started to form. I couldn't afford to buy property, not after the bankruptcy. But I could learn everything about it. I could understand how the market worked, how to identify good investments, how to manage properties. And maybe, someday, I could use that knowledge. I started watching videos online, following real estate investors on social media, joining forums where people discussed strategies and deals. I became obsessed, spending every spare moment learning, absorbing, planning. By February, Pete called me back to full-time hours. The economy was starting to recover, and people were getting their cars fixed again. It wasn't much, but it was steady, and it meant I could start saving a little bit each month. Not a lot. Maybe $100, sometimes less. But it added up. I opened a new bank account, one that was untouched by the bankruptcy, and every payday I transferred whatever I could spare into it. I called it my Freedom Fund, even though I didn't tell anyone about it. It was my secret, my goal, my reason to keep going. Spring arrived, and with it came the wedding invitations. I got mine in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon. Thick cardstock, embossed lettering, my name written in elegant calligraphy. Mr. Daniel Hayes. I opened it slowly, already knowing what it would say. Marcus Hayes and Simone Patterson request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony on Saturday, the 15th of April, at the Grandview Estate. Reception to follow. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend I'd never received it. But another part of me, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be brothers, to be family, wanted to go. Wanted to show up and prove that I was still here, still standing, even if barely. I RSVP'd yes. I didn't have a gift to give, didn't have money for a new suit. But I had the one suit I'd bought for job interviews years ago, and I had my pride, battered as it was. That would have to be enough. The weeks leading up to the wedding were strange. I didn't hear from Marcus at all, didn't get any of the usual pre-wedding communications. No bachelor party invitation, no rehearsal dinner details, nothing. It was like I was a ghost, present but not really seen. Emma called once to ask if I was really coming. She sounded surprised, like she'd expected me to bail. "Yeah, I'm coming," I told her. "He's still my brother." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "He's still really angry at you, you know. About the money thing." "I know," I said. "But I'll be there anyway." The day of the wedding arrived faster than I expected. I woke up early, my stomach already in knots. I put on my old suit, which was a little loose now because I'd lost weight over the winter. I couldn't afford a haircut, so I did my best to style it myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked tired. I looked worn. But I looked presentable, and that was all I could manage. I took the bus to the Grandview estate, getting off a few blocks away and walking the rest of the distance because I didn't want anyone to see me arriving by public transit. The venue was even more impressive in person than I'd imagined. A sprawling mansion with white columns and manicured gardens, overlooking the river that wound through the city. There were already cars in the parking lot, expensive ones, and people in designer dresses and tailored tuxedos making their way up the stone path to the entrance. I felt like an imposter. Like someone who'd crashed a party they had no business attending. But I kept walking, kept my head up, and followed the crowd inside. The ceremony was held in a ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon light. I sat in the back row, far from the family section, and watched as Marcus and Simone exchanged vows. She looked beautiful in a dress that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. He looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I felt a pang of something, not quite jealousy, maybe sadness. Sadness that we drifted so far apart. Sadness that this moment, which should have been joyful, was tainted by everything that had happened between us. After the ceremony, everyone filed into the reception hall. It was decorated with white roses and gold accents, with tables set with fine china and crystal glassware. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like tiny works of art. I found my assigned seat at a table near the back, far from the head table where Marcus and Simone sat with their wedding party and immediate family. I didn't recognize anyone at my table, and they didn't seem particularly interested in talking to me. That was fine. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to show up, to be present, to fulfill whatever obligation I felt I still had to my brother. Dinner was served. Multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. I ate slowly, savoring food that was better than anything I'd had in months. Around me, people laughed and chatted, toasting the happy couple, sharing stories and memories. I stayed quiet, invisible. And then, after the cake had been cut and the first dance had finished, Marcus stood up. He tapped a champagne glass with a knife, the clear ringing sound cutting through the conversation. The room gradually fell silent, everyone turning to look at him. He was smiling, that confident smile he'd always had, the one that made people want to listen to him. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Simone and I are so grateful for your love and support. We couldn't have done this without our families, our friends, all of you." People clapped politely. I felt my shoulders tense, some instinct telling me this wasn't just a thank you speech. "And I especially want to thank those who contributed to making this day possible," Marcus continued. "Planning a wedding like this isn't cheap, and we're fortunate to have people in our lives who were willing to invest in our happiness." He paused, and I saw him scan the room. His eyes landed on me, and something in his expression shifted. Something cold. "Of course, not everyone was able to help out," he said, his tone still light but with an edge now. "Some people, even family, had other priorities." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "My brother Daniel, for example, recently filed for bankruptcy. Lost his house, had to move into some tiny apartment across town. Tough situation, really. But hey, we all make our own choices, right?" The room went dead silent. I felt every eye turn toward me, felt the weight of 300 people's judgment pressing down on my shoulders. My face burned. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. Marcus raised his glass. "So here's to family, to those who show up when it matters, and to everyone here who made this day unforgettable. Cheers." Cheers, the room echoed weakly, glasses clinking. I sat there frozen, the champagne glass still raised in the air around me, the echo of that word bankruptcy hanging like smoke in the crystal chandelier light. My throat had closed up completely. I couldn't swallow, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but sit in that chair and feel the heat of humiliation crawl up my neck and spread across my face like wildfire. 300 people. 300 strangers and distant relatives and my brother's friends, all of them now looking at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of their expensive shoes. I heard whispers starting, soft at first, then growing louder. Someone at the table next to mine leaned over to their companion and said something behind their hand. I caught the words "poor thing" and "irresponsible" and should have known better. A woman in a purple dress 2 tables over was staring at me with her mouth slightly open, like she'd just witnessed a car accident. My sister Emma was sitting at a table near the front with her husband. She had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Not shock at what Marcus had done, but shock that I was actually there to hear it. My mother was at the head table, her face pale, looking down at her plate like she couldn't bear to meet anyone's eyes. My father sat next to her, stone-faced, giving nothing away. And Marcus, my brother, the man who'd just aired my deepest shame in front of everyone who mattered to him, he was still smiling. Still holding that champagne glass up like he'd just delivered the world's most clever toast. Simone was gripping his arm, her smile frozen in place, but her eyes darted nervously around the room like she was calculating the damage. For a second, just one brief second, I considered standing up and walking out. Just leaving quietly, slipping through the back door and disappearing into the evening air, letting them have their moment while I nursed my wounds somewhere private. That's what the old Daniel would have done. The Daniel who'd spent months in that studio apartment eating ramen and wondering where it all went wrong. The Daniel who'd learned to make himself small, to take up less space, to apologize for existing. But something had changed in those 6 months between the bankruptcy filing and this moment. Something I hadn't even fully realized until right now, sitting in this chair with everyone's eyes on me. I wasn't that person anymore. The bankruptcy hadn't broken me. It had stripped away everything I thought defined me, my house, my credit, my pride, and underneath all of that, I'd found something harder. Something that didn't bend. I'd spent the last 6 months not just surviving, but learning. Planning. Building something in secret that nobody knew about. Not my family. Not my friends. Nobody. I set my champagne glass down on the table, the soft clink of crystal against linen loud in the silence. Then I stood up. Slowly, deliberately, smoothing down the front of my second-hand suit jacket. The room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus's smile faltered just slightly, confusion flickering across his face. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected me to shrink, to disappear, to confirm everything he'd just implied about me being a failure. Instead, I was standing. Looking right at him. My voice came out steady, clearer than I thought it would be. "That's an interesting story, Marcus. I appreciate you sharing my business with everyone here. Very classy. Really sets the tone for a celebration." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Come on, man. I was just being honest. Family should be honest with each other, right?" "Absolutely," I said, taking a step away from my table, moving into the center aisle between the rows of reception tables. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples, but my hands were steady. "Since we're being honest, there's something I should probably share too." Marcus set his champagne glass down, his expression shifting from confident to wary. "What are you talking about?" I looked around the room, at all those faces still watching me, waiting to see what came next. "Well," I said, "you mentioned that I filed for bankruptcy." "That's true. I did. Lost my house, had to start over from basically nothing. It was one of the hardest things I've ever been through. I paused, let that sink in. But here's what you didn't mention. Here's the part you don't actually know, because we haven't really talked in over a year. The room was absolutely silent now. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. After I lost everything, I made a decision. I decided I was done waiting for permission to succeed. Done waiting for family to believe in me or support me or even just not actively humiliate me. I started learning everything I could about business, about investing, about real estate. I worked every hour I could at the shop, saved every dollar that didn't go to keeping myself fed and housed. And then, about 4 months ago, I met someone. My hands were in my pockets now, and I was walking slowly up the center aisle toward the head table, toward Marcus and Simone and my parents, all of them watching me like I was a stranger. His name was Richard Chen, I continued. He owns a commercial property development company, been in the business for 30 years. I met him when his car broke down outside the shop where I work. Alternator failure, if you're curious. We got to talking while I fixed it, and he asked me what I did besides turning wrenches. I told him I was studying real estate investment. He laughed, thought I was joking. But I showed him my notebooks, all the research I'd been doing, the market analysis, the property comparisons. He stopped laughing. I was close enough to the head table now that I could see the confusion on Marcus's face giving way to something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Richard needed someone to help him scout properties, I said. Someone who understood the market, who could spot potential, who wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty. He offered me a part-time position. No salary, just commission on deals that closed. I took it. Worked at the shop during the day, drove around looking at properties at night. Learned everything I could from him. My mother was staring at me now, her mouth slightly open. My father's expression hadn't changed, but he'd leaned forward in his chair. 3 months ago, I continued, Richard put together a deal on a commercial property. Big one. Mixed-use development opportunity, prime location, but it needed a lot of work. The previous owner had let it deteriorate, couldn't afford the upkeep. Richard needed investors, people willing to put in capital and take a risk on something that wasn't pretty. I didn't have capital. But I had sweat equity. I had time. I had skills. So Richard made me an offer. I could come in as a junior partner. 10% stake in exchange for managing the renovation and finding tenants. I stopped walking. I was standing right in front of the head table now, looking directly at Marcus, at Simone, at my parents. I took it, I said. Spent the last 3 months of my life working 16-hour days. Mornings at the shop, afternoons and nights at the property. I learned how to read blueprints, how to manage contractors, how to negotiate leases. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. Lived on coffee and gas station sandwiches. And you know what? The property closed last week. The silence in the room was so complete I could hear someone's watch ticking 3 tables away. We got our first tenant 2 days ago, I said. A corporate event planning company. 5-year lease. Premium rate. The numbers work. The property's going to be profitable. And my 10% stake, based on the current valuation, is worth about $240,000. I let that number hang in the air. Watched it land on Marcus like a physical blow. His face had gone pale. Simone's mouth was open, her hand still gripping his arm but tighter now, like she was holding on to keep from falling. But here's the really interesting part, I said, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice now, couldn't maintain that calm facade anymore. The property I've been working on, the one that Richard bought and I helped renovate? I pulled a folded piece of paper from my inside jacket pocket, held it up for everyone to see. It was the deed. The official documentation showing ownership, transfer, property details. This property, I said. The Grandview estate. I watched the realization hit Marcus like a freight train. His eyes went wide. His mouth moved but no sound came out. Simone actually gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in the silent room. That's right, I said, my voice strong now, steady with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. My partner Richard Chin bought this venue 6 weeks ago. It was in foreclosure, previous owners couldn't keep up with maintenance costs and tax liens. We got it for a fraction of what it's worth. And I've spent every night for the last month and a half making sure it was ready to host events again. Making sure the gardens were trimmed, the chandeliers were cleaned, the kitchen equipment was working, the sound system was updated. Every single detail that made tonight possible, I had a hand in. The room erupted. Not in applause, but in shocked murmurs and exclamations and the sudden electric buzz of 300 people all trying to process what they'd just heard at the same time. I saw my sister Emma stand up, her hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. I saw my father lean back in his chair like someone had pushed him. I saw my mother turn to look at Marcus, her expression unreadable. And Marcus, my brother, the man who'd just tried to destroy me in front of everyone he knew, he was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. So yes, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the noise, I filed for bankruptcy. I lost everything. But I didn't stay lost. And while you were planning this beautiful wedding, spending money you didn't have and begging family members for loans to pay for it, I was rebuilding. I was learning. I was working. And now I own 10% of the building you're standing in. I folded the deed back up and put it in my pocket. I hope you and Simone have a wonderful marriage, I said. I really do. But just so we're clear, the venue rental fee you paid for tonight, the one that probably maxed out your credit cards and drained your savings? A portion of that money just went into my pocket. I turned to walk away, but I couldn't resist one last thing. I looked back over my shoulder at Marcus, at his pale shocked face, at Simone's expression of horror. Thanks for the invitation, I said. It's been unforgettable. Then I walked back down that center aisle with my head high and my shoulders straight, past all those staring faces and whispered conversations, out through the ballroom doors and into the cool evening air. My hands were shaking when I reached the parking lot. Not from fear or anxiety, but from adrenaline, from the sheer overwhelming rush of finally standing up for myself in a way that mattered. I leaned against the stone wall outside the entrance and took several deep breaths, trying to slow my racing heart. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of the reception continuing, people talking and music starting up again as they tried to move past what had just happened. But it wouldn't be that easy. That moment, that revelation, it was going to echo through my family for a long time. I pulled out my phone to call a cab, and that's when I heard the door open behind me. I turned, half expecting to see Marcus coming out to confront me, maybe to yell or to throw a punch or to demand answers. But it wasn't Marcus. It was my father. He walked toward me slowly, his hands in his pockets, his expression still that same unreadable mask he'd worn inside. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other in the fading daylight. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Is it true? All of it? Every word, I said. He nodded slowly, processing. Why didn't you tell us? What you were doing, what you'd accomplished? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. When would I have told you, Dad? At the family meeting where everyone ganged up on me for not giving Marcus $20,000 I didn't have? Or maybe during one of the holidays I wasn't invited to because I'd become the family embarrassment? He flinched slightly at that. We didn't uninvite you. You chose not to come. Because I was drowning, I said, my voice harder now. Because I was barely keeping my head above water and the last thing I needed was to sit around a table and pretend everything was fine while everyone judged me for not being successful enough or generous enough or whatever enough. My father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, your brother shouldn't have said what he said in there. That was wrong. That was cruel. I waited, but he didn't say anything else. Didn't apologize for his own role in everything that had happened. Didn't acknowledge that he'd stood by while Marcus had tried to squeeze money out of me, while the family had slowly cut me out. Just that Marcus had been cruel. As if that was the only problem. I shook my head. I need to go. I have work tomorrow. Early shift. He nodded. Are you, he paused, searching for words. Are you doing okay? Financially, I mean. For the first time in our conversation, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was genuine. I'm doing better than okay, Dad. I'm doing better than I ever did when I had that house and that truck and all the things I thought meant I was successful. Because now I own something real. Something I built with my own hands and my own brain. Something nobody can take away from me. I turned to walk toward the street, toward the bus stop a few blocks away. My father called after me. Daniel. I stopped but didn't turn around. I'm proud of you, he said. The word should have meant something. Should have filled some hollow place inside me that had been empty for so long. But they just felt flat, too late and too conditional. Thanks, I said without looking back. Then I walked away. The bus ride home was long and quiet. I sat in the back, watching the city lights blur past the window, replaying the night in my mind. The shock on Marcus's face. The gasps from the crowd. The weight of that deed in my pocket, proof that I'd done something they'd all thought was impossible. When I finally got back to my studio apartment, I sat on the edge of my air mattress in the dark and let myself feel it all. The triumph, yes, but also the sadness. The anger. The grief for the family I thought I had, the one that was supposed to support each other no matter what. That family had never really existed, I realized. Or maybe it had once, when we were kids, before life got complicated and money got tight and everyone started keeping score. I didn't sleep much that night. Just lay there thinking about what came next. Because as satisfying as that moment had been, as good as it had felt to see Marcus's face when he realized I wasn't the failure he'd painted me as, it didn't solve anything. It didn't repair the relationships. It didn't make us family again. It just drew a line in the sand and dared them to cross it. My phone buzzed around 3 a.m. A text from Emma. That was the most insane thing I've ever seen. Are you okay? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'm fine. Better than fine. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Marcus is losing his mind. Simone's furious. Mom's crying. Dad won't talk to anyone. Good, I typed back. Then I turned off my phone and finally fell asleep. The next few days were strange. I went back to work at the shop like nothing had happened, but Pete had somehow heard about the wedding. Small town, word travels fast, especially when it's juicy gossip. He pulled me aside during lunch break, a rare smile on his weathered face. Heard you caused quite a scene at your brother's wedding. I shrugged, trying to play it down. Just set the record straight. Pete nodded, then clapped me on the shoulder. Good. People need to know when they're messing with the wrong guy. That moment of validation from someone who'd seen me at my lowest, who'd had to cut my hours and watch me struggle, meant more than anything my father had said. Richard called me that afternoon, his voice warm with amusement. Daniel, what the hell did you do? I'm getting calls from half the city asking about the Grandview deal. I told him the short version. When I finished, he laughed, a deep belly laugh that made me smile despite everything. That's one way to announce a partnership. Listen, we need to talk about your role going forward. You've proven you can handle pressure and you understand this business. I want to make you a full partner. 20% stake equals say in decisions. I almost dropped my phone. Richard, I can't afford to buy in more. I don't have that kind of capital. You don't need to buy in, he said. You've already earned it. The work you did on the Grandview, the tenants you've lined up, the way you managed that whole renovation while working full-time at a shop. That's worth more than money. Besides, I need someone I can trust, and trust isn't bought. It's earned. We met the next day at a coffee shop downtown to sign the paperwork. Richard was in his 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of calm confidence that comes from decades of making deals. He slid the partnership agreement across the table to me, and I read through it carefully, hardly believing what I was seeing. 20% of a company that owned multiple commercial properties. A salary that was triple what I made at the shop. Profit sharing. Decision-making authority. This wasn't just a job. This was a future. I signed my name at the bottom, my hand steady. Richard shook my hand firmly. "Welcome to the big leagues, kid. Don't screw it up." "I won't," I promised. And I meant it. The following week, I gave my notice at the shop. Pete wasn't surprised. He'd known this day was coming, had probably known it before I did. "You've outgrown this place," he said simply. "Go build something worth building." I worked my last 2 weeks there, finishing up jobs and training my replacement, a young guy fresh out of technical school with eager eyes and rough hands. On my last day, Pete handed me an envelope. "Open it later," he said gruffly. When I got home, I opened it to find $500 in cash and a note written in Pete's chicken scratch handwriting. "You were one of the best workers I ever had. Not because you were the fastest or the most skilled, but because you never quit. Even when you should have. That's rare. Don't lose it." I sat in my tiny apartment with that note in my hands and felt something crack open in my chest. This man, my boss who'd had to cut my hours and watch me struggle, had seen something in me that my own family hadn't. Had valued me not for what I could give him but for who I was. I folded the note carefully and put it in the drawer with the deed to the Grandview, 2 pieces of paper that represented the foundations of my new life. My first week as a full partner with Richard was overwhelming. I had to learn systems and processes, meet with lawyers and accountants, review property portfolios and financial projections. Richard threw me into the deep end without hesitation, expecting me to swim, and somehow I did. We had 3 other properties besides the Grandview. An office building downtown that was partially leased. A small shopping center on the east side that needed updating. And a residential apartment complex that was running smoothly but had potential for expansion. Richard put me in charge of the shopping center renovation, told me to use the same approach I'd used with the Grandview. Figure out what it needs, make it happen, find tenants who'll pay premium rates. I dove in. Spent days walking the property, talking to contractors, researching comparable properties in the area. Drew up plans, got bids, negotiated prices. It was exhausting and exhilarating and exactly what I needed. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something that mattered, something that would last. 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from Marcus. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was tight when he spoke, controlled anger barely held in check. "You made me look like an idiot. In front of everyone." I leaned back in my office chair, Richard's office chair technically but mine now too, and looked out the window at the city skyline. "You made yourself look like an idiot, Marcus." I just corrected the narrative. There was silence on the other end. Then he said, quieter now, "Why didn't you tell me? About the business, about what you were doing? Would you have listened?" I asked. "Or would you have found some way to make it about yourself, about how I was getting lucky or getting help I didn't deserve?" He didn't answer that. After a moment, he said, "Simone wants me to sue you." "For what?" "For telling the truth? For owning part of a building you chose to rent? Good luck with that." "Marcus," I said, cutting him off. "I didn't do this to hurt you. I didn't even do this to prove anything to you. I did it because I had to. Because after you and everyone else made it clear that I was on my own, I decided to actually be on my own. And it turns out I'm pretty good at it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, so quiet I almost didn't hear it, he said, "I'm sorry. For what I said at the wedding. It was too far. I should have felt vindicated. Should have felt satisfied that he was finally apologizing. But all I felt was tired." "Yeah," I said. "It was. But the thing is, Marcus, you didn't just cross a line at the wedding. You've been crossing lines for years. Asking me for money I didn't have. Blaming me for not being able to give it. Cutting me out when I couldn't meet your expectations. The wedding was just the moment it all came to a head. I don't know if we can fix this," he said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely uncertain, genuinely hurt. "I don't know either," I admitted. "But if we're going to try, it starts with you understanding that I don't owe you anything. Not money, not explanations, not forgiveness. Those things have to be earned. Can you do that?" Another long silence. "Then, I can try. That's all I'm asking," I said. Then I ended the call. I didn't know if Marcus would actually follow through, if he was capable of seeing me as something other than the little brother who was supposed to fall in line and do what he was told. But at least the door was cracked open, just slightly. Whether he walked through it was up to him. That night, I treated myself to something I hadn't done in over a year. I went to a real restaurant, not a fast food place or a corner deli, but an actual sit-down establishment with cloth napkins and a wine list. I ordered steak and potatoes and a glass of red wine, and I sat there alone at a table by the window and savored every bite. The waiter, a young guy probably working his way through college, asked if I was celebrating anything. "Yeah," I said. "I guess I am." He smiled. "Well, congratulations on whatever it is." When the check came, I looked at the total. $68 for one meal, more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. And I paid it without hesitation, without guilt, without that sick feeling in my stomach that came from spending money I couldn't afford to spend. Because I could afford it now. Not just barely, but comfortably. I left a generous tip, thanked the waiter, and walked out into the evening air feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed as I was walking to my car now, a used sedan I'd bought the week before with cash. A text from Emma. "Mom wants to have dinner. All of us. She wants to try to fix things. Can you come?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell them I was done trying to fix a family that had never fully supported me in the first place. But another part of me, the part that still remembered birthday cakes and Christmas mornings and backyard barbecues before everything got complicated, that part wanted to try. "When?" I texted back. "This Sunday. Mom's house. 6 o'clock. "I'll be there," I replied. Then I added, "But I'm not apologizing for anything." "Neither should you," Emma responded. Then, after a pause, "I'm proud of you, Daniel. Really proud." That message, simple as it was, meant more than she probably knew. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool night air wash over me, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt something close to peace. Sunday came faster than I expected. I spent the morning working on proposals for the shopping center renovation, then showered and changed into jeans and a button-down shirt. Nothing too formal, nothing that screamed "I'm successful now look at me," just clean and presentable. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6 o'clock. The driveway was already full. Marcus's car, Emma's SUV, my parents' sedan. I sat in my car for a minute, gathering myself, preparing for whatever was about to happen. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, older than I remembered somehow, with lines around her eyes I didn't recall seeing before. "Daniel," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "Come in." The house smelled the same as it always had, like coffee and laundry detergent and something baking. Familiar and foreign at the same time. Everyone was already in the living room. Marcus and Simone on the couch, Emma and her husband in the armchairs, my father standing by the window. They all looked up when I entered, and the room fell into an awkward silence. I took the empty seat, an ottoman near the fireplace, and waited. My mother sat down next to my father, her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know things have been," she paused, searching for the right word, "difficult lately." "That's one way to put it," I said. She nodded. "We wanted to talk. All of us. To try to understand what happened and how we move forward." Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Simone's hand was on his knee, whether to comfort him or restrain him I couldn't tell. "I think we all said and did things we regret," my mother continued. "In this family, we've been through too much to let money and misunderstandings tear us apart." "Money and misunderstandings," I repeated slowly. Is that what you think this is about? My father spoke up then, his voice firm. What else would it be about? It's about respect, I said, and I could hear my voice getting louder, feel the anger I'd been holding back starting to surface. It's about being treated like I mattered, like my struggles were real and valid and not just inconveniences to everyone else. It's about being asked for money I didn't have and then being treated like a failure when I couldn't provide it. Marcus leaned forward. I apologized for that already. On the phone. Did you? I asked. Because what I heard was I'm sorry I embarrassed you publicly, but not I'm sorry I tried to manipulate you into taking out a loan you couldn't afford for a wedding you didn't need to have at a venue you couldn't pay for. The room went silent. Simone's face flushed red. Marcus's jaw clenched. That's not fair, Marcus said. Isn't it? I shot back. You wanted me to mortgage my entire future for one day of celebration. And when I said no, when I told you I literally couldn't afford it, you cut me out. Made me feel like I wasn't part of this family anymore. We didn't cut you out, my mother protested. You stopped coming to things. Because I was drowning, I said, my voice breaking slightly despite my best efforts to stay controlled. Because I was working every hour I could just to keep a roof over my head. Because I filed for bankruptcy and lost everything and I didn't want to sit around a table and pretend everything was fine while you all judged me for not being successful enough. Emma spoke up then, her voice soft. We weren't judging you, Daniel. We were worried about you. Then why did no one call? I asked, looking at her directly. Why did no one ask how I was doing, what I needed, if there was anything they could do to help? Why was the first time I heard from any of you in months when Marcus decided to humiliate me at his wedding? No one had an answer for that. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Finally, my father cleared his throat. You're right, he said. We should have reached out. Should have been there for you. I'm sorry we weren't. That apology, coming from my father who rarely apologized for anything, should have felt like a victory. But it just felt hollow, too little too late. I stood up. I appreciate that, I said. I really do. But I need you all to understand something. I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm not the guy who's going to bend over backward trying to prove he deserves to be part of this family. I'm not going to apologize for succeeding or for standing up for myself. And if you can't accept that, if you need me to be small and struggling so you can feel better about yourselves, then maybe it's better if we just maintain distance. Marcus stood up too. That's not what anyone wants. Isn't it? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, it sure seemed like everyone was more comfortable when I was the screw-up, the one who needed help, the one who made everyone else look good by comparison. That's not true, my mother said, tears in her eyes now. We love you, Daniel. We want you in our lives. Then prove it, I said. Not with words, but with actions. Stop treating me like I'm still the broke mechanic living in a studio apartment. Stop bringing up the bankruptcy like it defines me. Start seeing me for who I am now, not who I was when things were falling apart. Can you do that? The room was quiet again. Then Emma stood up and walked over to me. She wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug, and I felt her shaking slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have been there. I should have called. You're right. I hugged her back, feeling some of the tension in my chest ease just slightly. Thanks, Em. When she pulled away, my mother was standing too. She came over and took my hands in hers, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I failed you, she said simply. As a mother, I should have protected you, should have stood up for you. Instead, I stayed quiet and let things happen that never should have happened. I'm so sorry, Daniel. That apology, raw and honest and without excuses, that one finally reached me. I squeezed her hands. I love you, Mom. But things have to change. They will, she promised. They will. My father approached next, extending his hand. I looked at it for a moment, then shook it. He held on longer than necessary, his grip firm. "You've become a man I'm proud of," he said. "I just wish I'd told you that before you had to prove it." Marcus was the last one. He stood up slowly, Simone rising with him. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. Vulnerability. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About a lot of things. I let money and status and what other people thought become more important than my own brother. And what I did at the wedding, there's no excuse for that. I was cruel and petty and I'm ashamed of it. I didn't say anything, just waited. I don't know how to fix this," he continued. "But I want to try. If you'll let me." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the successful older brother I'd always tried to live up to, but just a man who'd made mistakes and was trying to own them. "It's going to take time," I said. "And it's going to require you actually showing up, actually being a brother instead of just expecting me to fall in line." "I can do that," he said. Then he did something I didn't expect. He held out his hand. I stared at it for a second, remembering all the times that hand had pushed me away, literally and figuratively. Then I took it. We shook, and in that moment, I felt something shift. Not a complete healing, not a magical restoration of everything that had been broken. But a beginning. A possibility. Dinner that night was awkward at first, everyone walking on eggshells, trying too hard to be normal. But gradually, as the food was passed and wine was poured and conversation started flowing, it got easier. We didn't talk about the wedding or the bankruptcy or any of the painful things that had happened. Instead, we talked about Emma's kids and my father's golf game and my mother's book club. Normal things. Family things. When I left that night, I felt different. Not fixed, not whole, but less angry. Less hurt. Like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that didn't require me to choose between my family and my self-respect. The weeks that followed were busy. Richard and I closed on another property, a small hotel that needed extensive renovations. I threw myself into the project, managing contractors and designers and city permits. The work was exhausting but satisfying, every problem solved and every milestone reached proof that I'd found my calling. Marcus called me one afternoon, his voice tentative. "Hey, do you have time for coffee?" I checked my watch. I had a meeting in 2 hours but nothing before that. "Sure." "Where?" There was a cafe downtown that had good espresso and quiet corners. We met there, both of us arriving at exactly the same time, which made us both smile despite the awkwardness. We ordered our drinks and found a table by the window. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke, just sipped our coffee and watched people walk by outside. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "Simone and I are separating," he said quietly. I looked at him, surprised. "What? When?" "It's been coming for a while," he admitted. "The wedding, that was supposed to fix things between us. Like if we just made it official, made it perfect, all our problems would disappear. But they didn't. They got worse." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want him to be in pain. He looked down at his coffee cup, tracing the rim with his finger. "She never forgave me for what happened at the wedding. Said I humiliated her as much as I humiliated you. And the thing is, she was right. I was so focused on trying to make myself feel bigger by making you feel smaller that I didn't realize I was destroying everything around me." We sat there for a while longer, talking about things we'd never talked about before. He told me about the gambling debts he'd hidden from everyone, about the pressure he felt to maintain an image he couldn't afford, about how scared he was of ending up alone. I told him about the nights I'd sat in that studio apartment wondering if I'd ever amount to anything, about the shame I'd felt signing those bankruptcy papers, about how close I'd come to giving up entirely. By the time we left that cafe, something had shifted between us. Not back to how it was before, that version of our relationship was gone forever, but into something new. Something built on honesty instead of expectation. Something that felt more real. 6 months later, I moved out of the studio apartment and into a townhouse in a decent neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but it had 2 bedrooms and a small backyard and windows that let in actual sunlight. The day I moved in, Marcus showed up with Emma and her husband, all of them carrying boxes and helping me unpack. We ordered pizza and sat on my empty living room floor eating straight from the box, and it felt like family again. Real family, not the performance we'd all been putting on for years. The business continued to grow. Richard and I expanded into residential development, started buying distressed properties and renovating them for resale. I discovered I had an eye for potential, could walk through a rundown house and see exactly what it could become. Within a year, my 20% stake had grown to be worth over $500,000. I paid off every debt I still owed, rebuilt my credit from the ground up, started investing in my future instead of just surviving my present. But the money, as much as it changed my circumstances, didn't change who I was. I still drove a modest car, still shopped at the same grocery store, still remembered what it felt like to count pennies and hope they'd stretch far enough. That experience, as painful as it had been, had taught me something valuable about what actually mattered. One evening, I got a call from Pete at the auto shop. His voice was rough, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Daniel, I need to talk to you about something. I'm selling the shop." The words hit me harder than I expected. That shop had been my lifeline when I had nothing, the place that kept me employed when I was at my lowest. "What happened?" I asked. Pete sighed. "I'm getting old. Body can't keep up with the work anymore. And honestly, the business has been struggling. Too much competition from the chain places, not enough customers willing to pay for quality work. I've got a buyer interested, but the offer is lower than I hoped. Way lower." I met him at the shop the next day. It looked the same as it always had, a little worn but clean, tools organized on the walls, that familiar smell of oil and metal. Pete walked me through the numbers, showed me the books, explained what the buyer was offering. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough for a man who'd spent 40 years building something. "How much do you need?" I asked. Pete named a figure. It was substantial but not impossible. I thought for a moment, then made a decision. "I'll buy it." Pete looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "What?" "I'll buy the shop," I repeated. "For what you're asking, not what that other buyer offered. You've been good to me, Pete. You kept me employed when you didn't have to, you believed in me when nobody else did. Let me do this." His eyes got misty, and he turned away to compose himself. "I can't let you do that. You've got your own business to run." "I can do both," I said. "Or rather, I can find someone to manage this place day to day while I handle the business side. Keep the shop running the way it should be, keep your legacy alive." Pete was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "You've got yourself a deal." We shook on it, and just like that, I became the owner of the auto shop that had once been my only source of income. It felt like a circle closing, like honoring the place that had kept me afloat when I was sinking. I hired a manager, a skilled mechanic Pete recommended who'd been working at one of those chain places and hated it. Gave him a fair salary and a small ownership stake, told him to run it like it was his own. The shop started turning a profit within 3 months. Not huge numbers but steady and sustainable. Every time I drove past it and saw the lights on and cars in the bays, I felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with preservation. Marcus and I started having lunch once a month. Nothing forced, nothing obligatory, just 2 brothers catching up. He'd found a smaller apartment after the divorce, started going to therapy, got a handle on his spending. He seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the need to appear perfect. During one of those lunches, he looked at me across the table and said something I'd never expected to hear. "I envy you." I raised an eyebrow. "You envy me?" He nodded. "You lost everything and came back stronger. I've been trying to maintain this image of success my whole life, and it nearly destroyed me. But you let it all go and built something real. Something that actually matters." I set down my fork. It didn't feel like that at the time. At the time it felt like drowning. I know, he said. But you didn't drown. That's the difference between us. When things got hard for me, I tried to drag other people down. When things got hard for you, you learned to swim. We sat with that for a moment, the weight of those words settling between us. Then I said, it's not too late, you know. To build something real. Marcus smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I'm starting to figure that out. My mother called me one afternoon in tears, but happy tears this time. Your father and I want to do something, she said. We want to make things right. Mom, you don't have to do anything. Just listen, she insisted. When you lost your house, when you were struggling, we should have helped. We had money in savings, we could have given you something to keep you afloat. We didn't, and that was wrong. So we want to give it to you now. Mom, I don't need money. I'm doing fine. I know, she said. That's why we want to give it to you. Not because you need it, but because you should have had it then. Please, Daniel. Let us do this. I met them at their house the following weekend. My father handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $15,000. The exact amount Marcus had asked me for all those time ago. This is your inheritance, my father said. Early, but it's yours. We want you to have it now, while we're here to see you use it. I looked at the check, at the number written in my father's careful handwriting, and felt emotion tighten my throat. Thank you, I managed to say. I don't know what else to say except thank you. My mother hugged me tight. We love you. We're so proud of you. And we're sorry it took us so long to show it properly. I donated that $15,000 to a local charity that helped people facing bankruptcy, that provided financial counseling and legal assistance to those who were drowning the way I had been. I did it in my parents' names, sent them a copy of the donation receipt. My mother called me crying again, telling me that was the most meaningful thing anyone had ever done. 2 years after that wedding, I stood in the ballroom of the Grandview estate once again. But this time, I wasn't a guest. I was the host. Richard and I were throwing a celebration for the company's 5th anniversary, and we'd invited everyone who'd been part of our journey. Employees, contractors, clients, friends, family. The room was full of people laughing and talking, champagne flowing, music playing. I looked around at everything we'd built, not just the physical properties but the relationships, the trust, the community of people who believed in doing good work and treating each other right. Marcus was there with a date, a woman he'd met in his therapy group who seemed genuine and kind. Emma was there with her family, her kids running around the garden outside. My parents sat at a table near the front, my father's hand covering my mother's, both of them smiling. Richard found me standing by the window overlooking the garden. You did good, kid, he said, clinking his glass against mine. We did good, I corrected. He shook his head. No, you did this. I just gave you the opportunity. You took it and ran with it and built something I never could have built alone. That's all you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled and sipped my champagne. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left and only close friends and family remained, Marcus asked if he could say something. I nodded, and he stood up, tapping his glass to get everyone's attention. I want to make a toast, he said, his voice steady and clear. 2 years ago, I stood in this very room and said something cruel to my brother. I tried to humiliate him, to make myself feel better by making him feel worse. It was one of the worst things I've ever done, and I've spent every day since trying to make up for it. He looked at me, his eyes bright. Daniel, you are one of the strongest people I know. Not because you never fell, but because you got back up. Not because you never struggled, but because you kept fighting even when everyone around you had given up. You taught me that success isn't about how much money you have or what people think of you. It's about integrity, about doing the right thing even when it's hard, about building something that matters. He raised his glass. To Daniel. To second chances. To family. The room erupted in applause and cheers, people raising their glasses and calling my name. I felt my face flush, felt emotion well up in my chest. I stood and raised my own glass. To everyone in this room, I said. To the people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. To the ones who gave me chances I didn't deserve. To the family who learned to show up, and to the friends who became family when I needed them most. This isn't my success. It's ours. We drank together, and in that moment, surrounded by people who actually cared, who actually showed up, who actually saw me for who I was, I realized something important. The bankruptcy hadn't destroyed me. It had stripped away everything that didn't matter and left only what did. The relationships built on truth instead of obligation. The work that fulfilled me instead of just paying bills. The version of myself that didn't need permission or validation from anyone else. Standing there in the Grandview estate, the venue where I'd been humiliated and where I'd found my power, I finally understood what it meant to be free. Not free from struggle or pain or difficulty, because those things never really go away. But free from the need to prove anything to anyone except myself. Free to build a life on my own terms, with people who chose to be part of it rather than people who felt obligated. Free to define success not by what I owned but by who I'd become. The night ended with music and dancing, with my mother pulling me onto the floor for a slow song and my father cutting in halfway through. Marcus and I stood side by side at one point, watching everyone enjoy themselves, and he put his hand on my shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For showing me what it looks like to actually be strong." I looked at him and saw not my older brother, not my rival, not the person who'd hurt me, but just a man trying to be better. "That's what family does," I said. "They don't give up." Months continued to pass, seasons changed, and life moved forward in the way it always does. The business kept growing. I bought more properties, hired more people, made more deals. But I never forgot what it felt like to have nothing, to be dismissed, to wonder if I'd ever matter to anyone. That memory kept me grounded, kept me humble, kept me focused on what actually counted. I started mentoring young people who were struggling, kids from rough backgrounds who needed someone to believe in them. I hired people who'd made mistakes, who had gaps in their resumes or credit problems or past bankruptcies. I gave them the chances nobody had given me, and I watched them flourish. One of those people was a young woman named Casey who'd been living in her car when I met her. She'd applied for a job managing one of our apartment complexes, and during the interview, she'd been honest about her situation. I hired her on the spot, gave her a unit in the building rent-free for the first 3 months while she got on her feet. 2 years later, she was our most successful property manager, and she'd just bought her first house. She came to my office to tell me, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my life," she said. I shook my head. "No. You saved your own life. I just gave you a door to walk through." That became my philosophy, my purpose. Not to save people, because nobody can do that for someone else. But to open doors, to create opportunities, to believe in people when they'd stopped believing in themselves. It was the greatest work I'd ever done, more meaningful than any profit margin or property value. 5 years after the wedding, I sat in my office overlooking the city and reflected on how far I'd come. From a mechanic working part-time hours to a real estate developer with multiple properties and dozens of employees. From a man sleeping on an air mattress in a studio apartment to someone who owned a home and had security and could help others find the same. But more than that, from someone who'd let his family's opinions define him to someone who defined himself. The road hadn't been easy. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt, still times when old wounds ached. But I'd learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about integrating it, learning from it, letting it shape you without letting it break you. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Lunch tomorrow? There's someone I want you to meet." I smiled and typed back. "Sounds good. See you then." As I set down my phone and turned back to the work on my desk, I caught my reflection in the window. The man looking back at me was different from the one who'd sat in that bankruptcy attorney's office all those years ago. Stronger, Yes. More successful, definitely. But also more at peace. More sure of who he was and what he stood for. That man in the window had been tested and tempered and transformed. He'd lost everything and gained something better. He'd been humiliated and found his voice. He'd been broken and rebuilt himself into something unbreakable. And as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I realized that the best revenge wasn't what I'd done at the wedding, standing up and revealing my success to everyone who doubted me. The best revenge was this: living a life I was proud of, surrounded by people who valued me, doing work that mattered, being the kind of man I'd always wanted to be. That was the real victory. Not proving them wrong, but proving myself right. Not making them see me, but learning to see myself. The bankruptcy had been the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it had also been the catalyst for the best thing, the moment I stopped waiting for permission to become who I was meant to be. And for that, painful as it was, I wouldn't change a thing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.